A black woman, pushed to her limits by her mother-in-law's constant insults and subtle digs, secretly spit into her food out of sheer frustration. She thought her small act of defiance would go unnoticed until the day her husband walked in and caught her in the act. What he did next was shocking and changed everything for their family. Ella stood in the kitchen, her hands shaking a little as she looked at the big pot of stew on the stove. She could hear the soft clinking sound of the spoon stirring the stew. It was a quiet and normal kitchen sound, but Ella's mind was busy thinking about other things. Every day there were comments, little mean things that hurt her feelings. Helen, her husband James's mother, was always the one saying them. Ella hesitated for a moment, but then frustration bubbled up in her like the stew. She glanced toward the dining room where James was sitting down, not noticing how upset she was. Helen was in the kitchen too, setting the table and humming like everything was perfectly fine. But Ella knew it wasn't. She had stopped pretending to be happy a long time ago. Ella took a deep breath and leaned over the pot. She made sure no one could see her as she did something small but bold. She spat into the stew. It was quick, and the bubbling stew hit it right away. No one would know, except her. She felt a strange mix of triumph and guilt. It was wrong, but it felt like a tiny act of rebellion. Ella's life with James had started out happy, but everything changed after they moved in with Helen. Helen always made sure Ella knew she wasn't good enough. James loved his mother, and Ella could tell he often compared her to Helen, even if he didn't say it out loud. At first, Ella tried hard to be nice to Helen. She kept quiet, smiled, and did her best to be a good daughter-in-law. But Helen's comments hurt, no matter how small they seemed. They felt like little pinches, disguised as advice. "Are you sure you want to wear that? It looks a little too young for you," Helen would say, raising an eyebrow. Or she would casually mention how much James loved her cooking. "You should ask me for some tips," she'd say with a fake smile. Ella tried to brush it off, but every word chipped away at her happiness. Tonight, when Helen told her to cook James's favorite stew, Ella felt the anger grow inside her. "This was his favorite when he was little," Helen said earlier, watching Ella in the kitchen. "You're making it right, aren't you?" Ella forced a smile. "Of course," she said. But inside, she was annoyed. She hated how Helen's voice and opinions seemed to fill every corner of their home. It felt like Ella wasn't part of the family, like she was just an extra person living in their lives. As Ella stirred the stew, she heard Helen's voice in her head again. "You never season your food enough. Use more salt." Yesterday, Helen had criticized Ella's cooking, even though Ella had worked all day before making dinner. Ella's spit into the stew was a tiny way to fight back. It felt like her own little secret, something she could do to feel in control for once. But as she finished cooking, the guilt started creeping in. Was it worth it? Helen came back into the kitchen, interrupting Ella's thoughts. "Is the stew ready?" "James is waiting," Helen said, looking at Ella like she always did, with a little smirk. "It's almost done," Ella said, trying to hide her emotions. She didn't want Helen to see how upset she was. At dinner, James ate the stew happily, smiling at his mother and chatting like everything was perfect. Helen made her usual comments, and Ella sat quietly, feeling a mix of guilt and anger. The spit didn't change anything. It didn't make her feel better or fix the problems. Later, Ella stood in front of a mirror, adjusting her dress. She didn't feel good about how she looked. Helen had commented earlier in the day, saying, "That dress is too tight for you, don't you think?" Helen had said it lightly, sipping her coffee, but it hurt Ella all the same. Ella's phone buzzed. It was a message from James. "I'll be home late tonight. Have a nice dinner." Ella sighed. She was relieved James wouldn't be home right away, but she was also frustrated. James never noticed how hard it was for her to live with his mother. Whenever Ella tried to talk about it, James didn't seem to care or believe her. As the night went on, Helen kept making little remarks, always smiling, always pretending to be kind. But Ella knew the truth. Helen wanted her to feel small, and it was working. Ella felt like she didn't belong in her own home, and she didn't know how to change it. The quiet sounds of dinner filled the house, forks clinking and Helen chatting with James, but inside, Ella felt empty. Empty. She wondered if she would ever stop feeling this way, or if she'd just keep spitting into the stew, hoping for a change that might never come. Ella was in the kitchen, standing at the counter, chopping vegetables for dinner. Helen, her mother-in-law, sat at the table, flipping through a magazine. The room was filled with the warm smell of spices from the stew bubbling on the stove. It should have been a cozy scene, but Ella felt tense. She could feel Helen's eyes on her, watching, judging. Out of nowhere, Helen spoke, her voice as sweet as honey. "Ella, have you ever thought about losing a few pounds, dear? You'd feel so much better if you slimmed down just a little." Ella's hand froze on the knife for a moment. She tightened her grip, forcing herself to stay calm. Helen's tone was light and cheerful, like she was offering helpful advice, but Ella knew better. Her heart thumped as she tried to think of the right response. "I'm happy with how I look," Ella said finally, her voice colder than she wanted it to be. Helen smiled and waved her hand like it wasn't a big deal. "Oh, of course, of course. But I just want you to be healthy. Carrying extra weight can cause all kinds of problems. I'm only saying this because I care about you." Ella felt her face grow hot. She wanted to shout, to tell Helen to mind her own business, but she knew it wouldn't do any good. Helen always found a way to turn things around, to make Ella look like she was overreacting. Instead, Ella turned back to the vegetables, chopping them harder than she needed to. It wasn't just the comment about her weight that bothered Ella. It was the way Helen said it, like Ella didn't know her own body or her own life. It was the way Helen always acted like she had the right to give her opinion on everything Ella did. When dinner was finally ready, they sat down at the table. Helen smiled her ever-present smile and turned to James, Ella's husband. "James, you must tell Ella how much her cooking has improved," Helen said, her voice dripping with sweetness. "I've been trying to teach her, of course, but it's been a slow process." James, oblivious to the tension in the room, smiled at Ella. "It's delicious, honey. I think Mom's tips are helping you." He looked at Helen, his face full of admiration. "Isn't that right, Mom?" Ella forced herself to smile back. "Of course, it's all thanks to Helen," she said, but her stomach churned. James didn't notice how Helen's words hurt Ella. He never did. He adored his mother, and that love blinded him to all the little ways Helen made Ella feel small. Ella had tried to tell him before, but he always dismissed her concerns, saying things like, "That's just how Mom is," or "She doesn't mean it like that." Every day, Ella felt like she was fighting a silent battle. Helen's comments weren't outright mean, but they were sneaky, hidden behind a sweet tone and a smile. They made Ella feel like she wasn't good enough, like she didn't belong in her own home. At first, Ella tried to brush it off, but the tension kept building. Each night, as the house grew quiet, Ella felt the weight of Helen's words pressing down on her. One night, when she was feeling especially upset, she did something she never thought she'd do. She was making dinner, stirring a pot of stew, when a wave of frustration washed over her. Without thinking, she spit into the stew. It was a small, quick act, but it made her feel like she had taken back some control. At first, Ella told herself it was just a one-time thing. But as the days went on and Helen's comments kept coming, Ella found herself doing it again. It became a habit, a secret way to let out her anger. She knew it wasn't right, but she couldn't stop. It felt like the only way she could fight back without starting a fight she couldn't win. Still, the guilt ate at her. She stayed awake at night, wondering if she was being unfair. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe Helen wasn't as bad as she thought. But then Ella would remember all the times Helen had hurt her and never apologized. Helen acted like Ella was a project she could fix, like Ella wasn't good enough as she was. James never saw any of it. He was wrapped up in his love for his mother, blind to how she treated Ella. To him, Helen could do no wrong. One evening, Ella was in the kitchen again, making stew. Helen sat at the table, flipping through her magazine like usual. She looked up and said, "Stew? Don't you think that's a bit heavy for you, Ella? You know, with your figure." Ella's chest tightened. She stirred the pot, trying to ignore Helen's words, but her hands shook as she worked. She hated how Helen's comments always got to her. The front door opened and Ella heard James's voice. "I'm home early." Ella's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to be home so soon. She quickly turned around, trying to hide her surprise. James walked into the kitchen, smiling. "Hey, I thought we could have dinner together. The guys didn't want to go out tonight." Ella tried to smile back, but her stomach churned. She glanced at the pot of stew, her heart pounding. She hadn't stirred it yet. James walked closer, looking into the pot. His face changed, his smile fading. "What's that?" he asked, pointing to the stew. Ella froze. Floating in the stew was a tiny drop of spit. Her secret was out. "James, I didn't mean to," she stammered, her voice shaking. James stared at her, his face a mix of confusion and disbelief. He looked back at the pot, then at Ella, trying to understand what he was seeing. The room was silent, the tension so thick Ella could barely breathe. She wanted to explain, but the words wouldn't come. James just kept staring, and Ella felt like the walls were closing in. In that moment, everything Ella had been holding inside threatened to spill out. The anger, the frustration, the sadness. It was all too much. But she stayed silent, unable to find the courage to say what she was really feeling. James didn't say anything either. He just stood there, staring at the pot, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Ella turned away, her face burning with shame. She knew she couldn't take back what she had done. She couldn't undo the hurt she had caused. All she could do was wait, hoping James would understand. But deep down, she knew he wouldn't. That night, as Ella lay in bed, she stared at the ceiling, her heart heavy. She felt trapped, stuck in a life where she couldn't speak her mind, where she couldn't be herself. She wanted things to change, but she didn't know how. As the days went on, the tension in the house only grew. Ella kept pretending everything was fine, but inside she felt like she was falling apart. She knew it was only a matter of time before something gave, but until then, all she could do was keep going, one day at a time. Ella felt the heavy feeling of James's eyes looking at her. He looked sad, like he didn't understand. Finally, James asked softly, "Why?" His voice sounded hurt, and it made Ella's chest ache. She opened her mouth to explain, but the words just wouldn't come out. Her thoughts were spinning like a tornado, and she didn't know what to say. How could she make him understand? "I wasn't thinking," Ella whispered, her voice shaky. "It was just a mistake." She swallowed hard, feeling nervous. James didn't move. His eyes stayed on her, waiting for an answer. The air in the room felt heavy, like it was hard to breathe. Ella felt like she was shrinking under the weight of his stare. She knew he had caught her. He saw what she did. "Ella," James said again, his voice cracking. "What's going on? Why would you do this?" Ella wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to explain how angry and lonely she had been feeling in their house. But how could she say it? How could she tell him about the years of feeling hurt, about the way his mom, Helen, always made her feel small? It wasn't just one thing. It was a lot of little things building up over time. She had been so upset that she ended up doing something silly just to let it all out. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "I didn't mean it, James," she said, her voice breaking. "It's just, things have been really hard, okay? I didn't know what else to do." James frowned, looking confused. He took a small step closer, but his voice sounded cold now, not kind. "Hard? Hard because of what?" he asked. Ella didn't know how to explain. How could she tell him that his mom always made her feel like she wasn't good enough? How could she explain how hurt she felt when he always seemed to take his mom's side? Instead of saying all that, she just stared at the floor. James let out a big sigh. His voice was softer now, but it still sounded sad. "Ella, why didn't you talk to me?" he asked. "Why didn't you tell me what was wrong instead of doing this?" Ella felt so guilty. She never wanted to hurt James. She didn't want him to feel like he had let her down. But she was tired of feeling invisible. She was tired of feeling like Helen was the most important person in his life. "I didn't know how," she whispered. "I didn't know how to talk to you when you were always so busy with her." James's face changed. He looked like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He just stared at Ella, and the room got so quiet it was almost too loud. Then Helen, who had been sitting quietly in the kitchen, finally spoke. "James," she said in a soft but firm voice, "maybe we should all sit down and talk about this." But Ella saw the look on Helen's face. She didn't get it. She didn't understand how Ella had been feeling for so long. As James looked at his mom, Ella felt her heart sink. She knew things had changed, things had broken, and it would be hard to put them back together. That night, Ella couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened. James's sad face kept popping into her mind. She could still hear the hurt in his voice when he had asked her why. She wished she could have told him everything, but the words just wouldn't come. Ella loved James. She really did. But their life together always felt like it was stuck in Helen's shadow. Ella had been holding all her feelings inside for so long, and now it felt like they had exploded. She worried James would never look at her the same way again. She rolled over and saw the clock. It was late, but she couldn't fall asleep. She got up and went to the kitchen. Maybe some water would help. The house was quiet. She opened the fridge and grabbed a bottle of water, but her eyes landed on the pot of stew she had made for dinner. No one had eaten it. She had made it, but she had done something bad to it because she was so mad earlier. Now, looking at the stew, she felt even worse. Suddenly, she heard footsteps. She didn't need to turn around to know it was Helen. "Can't sleep?" Helen asked, her voice calm but serious. Ella didn't look at her. She tightened her grip on the water bottle. "No, just thinking," she said quietly. There was a pause. Then Helen spoke again, her voice sharper this time. "You've been acting strange lately, Ella. Is everything okay?" Ella felt her body tense up. She knew Helen had noticed something was wrong. Helen always noticed things like that. Ella had tried to hide it, but it wasn't working anymore. "I'm fine," Ella said quickly, but even she didn't believe her own words. Helen stepped closer. "Ella," she said softly, her eyes narrowing, "you can't fool me. I know something's going on with you and James. What is it?" Ella felt something inside her snap. She was tired of pretending. She was tired of feeling like Helen was in charge of her life. "I'm tired, Helen," Ella said, her voice shaking. "I'm tired of you always making me feel like I don't belong in my own home. I'm tired of you acting like you're the only one who knows what's right. I'm tired of James always choosing you over me. I feel invisible, like I don't even matter." The words came out in a rush, and Ella couldn't stop them. Her chest felt heavy, but for the first time she felt like she was finally saying how she felt. Ella felt her voice shaking as she spoke. All the sadness and frustration she had felt for years came spilling out in one big, messy confession. It wasn't about the stew anymore. It was everything. Every little comment, every time Helen made her feel small, and the constant feeling that she was never good enough. Helen stood there quietly. Her face didn't show much emotion, and she didn't try to argue or stop Ella. She just looked at her, her eyes sharp but not mean. Then Helen finally spoke. Her voice was calm and slow. "I didn't know you felt like that," she said softly. Ella felt her chest tighten. "Of course you didn't," she said bitterly. "You never listen. You're always so busy thinking about what you think is best for everyone. You never stop to ask me what I need." Helen flinched. Her face showed a tiny bit of hurt, but she quickly covered it up. "I thought I was helping you," she said, her voice quiet. I thought I was guiding you. Ella let out a harsh laugh and shook her head. Guiding me? No, you've been controlling me. You tell me what to wear, what to eat, what to do. It feels like I can't even breathe when you're around. I don't even know who I am anymore. The room went quiet. Both women felt the weight of everything that had been said. Helen's expression softened. She stood a little differently now, as though Ella's words had made a crack in the wall she had built around herself. I didn't realize, Helen said, her voice softer now. I thought I was doing what was best for you, for James, for this family. But now I see that I've been so focused on making everything perfect that I didn't notice what you needed. Ella's anger started to fade. She didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Helen she expected. Helen wasn't arguing or making excuses. She was listening. For the first time in a long time, Ella felt something warm inside her, something like hope. I don't want to fight anymore, Ella whispered. I just want to feel like I'm not invisible, like I matter. Helen nodded and stepped closer. You do matter, Ella. I promise you, you do, and I'll try harder to show you. In that moment, something changed between them. It was a small change, like a tiny crack that let a bit of light in. Ella didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she believed things could get better. Maybe not right away, but someday. Gloria smiled softly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'm here for you, Mia. I always have been, even when I didn't show it. Just then, they heard footsteps. David walked into the room, looking between them with concern. He'd been giving them space, but now he wondered how things were going. Everything okay? He asked carefully. Mia and Gloria exchanged a look, a quiet understanding passing between them. This moment, this real and honest moment, had been something they had both worked for. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Mia nodded, her heart feeling lighter. Yeah, David, everything's going to be okay. Gloria looked at her son and then back at Mia. We're working on things. We're starting to understand each other better. We're trying. David looked at them both, unsure at first, but then his face softened. I'm glad to hear that, he said quietly. I don't want to be stuck in the middle anymore. I want both of you to be happy. Mia smiled, feeling relief and gratitude. She never thought she'd see a day when she and Gloria could stand together, share their feelings, and want change. But here they were, starting to take the first steps towards something better. We'll get there, Gloria said gently. We'll get there together. In that moment, Mia realized that rebuilding trust wouldn't be easy. It would take time, patience, and effort from all three of them. But for the first time in a long time, Mia believed healing was possible. Later, the kitchen smelled of fresh herbs, spices, and vegetables cooking. It was a warm smell, a nice change from the tension that used to fill the space. Mia and Gloria worked together, chopping vegetables and preparing a roast. It wasn't easy, cooking together after everything they had been through, but there was a quiet understanding between them now. David had gone to the living room, giving them space to work side by side. Mia never thought she would see the day when her husband's mom, Gloria, and she would be in the same room, not fighting, but working together in the kitchen. It seemed like such a small thing, but to her, it was very important. Gloria put a fresh loaf of bread in the oven and smiled at Mia. You know, I don't think I've ever seen you so focused in the kitchen, Gloria said with a gentle voice. You've really improved since we first started cooking together. Mia stopped for a moment, surprised by her kind words. There was no teasing, no sarcasm, just honesty. It felt strange to hear something nice from Gloria, especially after all the years of criticism. But Mia smiled and replied, I've had to figure a few things out myself, but I think I'm getting better at it. Gloria laughed softly and added some seasoning to the roast. I think you're more than just getting better. You're really good at this, she said. Mia's heart swelled with happiness. For the first time, she felt proud of herself. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. She wasn't just the woman who had been criticized all the time anymore. She was someone learning to take control of her own life. Mia looked at Gloria and said quietly, "You've helped me more than you know. You taught me a lot about cooking, but more than that, I think I've learned to trust myself again." Gloria's face softened, and Mia thought maybe she felt bad for the way she'd been so controlling before. "I didn't mean to take your confidence away, Mia," Gloria said. "I thought I was helping, but I see now that I was holding on too tightly. You're strong, and I should have let you be that way sooner." Mia felt something inside her stir. It was like all the hurt and anger she had been holding on to for so long was finally starting to fade. "Thank you for saying that," Mia said, feeling her voice shake. "I've been holding so much bitterness inside, but now I see I don't need to anymore." They both stood quietly for a moment, letting the silence fill the space between them. It wasn't easy to fix all the years of tension, but Mia could feel something was changing. Slowly but surely, they were starting to heal. Mia and Gloria stood quietly in the kitchen. The air between them felt lighter. Mia realized that the argument they had just had was necessary. It had been painful and uncomfortable, but it helped them see each other in a new way. The healing had started, and even though it wasn't going to be easy, Mia believed they could move forward. They weren't enemies anymore. They were two women who had been misunderstood but were now given a chance to really understand each other. The next few days were quiet. There wasn't much talking, just the sounds of everyday life. Footsteps on the creaky floor, the hum of the refrigerator, and the clink of dishes as meals were made. The tension between Mia and Gloria had lessened, but it wasn't gone. Mia could feel that they were still walking carefully around each other, unsure of what to do next. David, still thinking about everything that had happened, decided to give them space. He stayed busy with his work while Mia and Gloria tried to figure things out. Mia spent those days thinking about everything: the fight, the hurtful things said, and the years of anger between her and Gloria. She felt guilty, and it made her feel terrible. Mia never wanted to hurt David, but her choices hurt him, herself, and Gloria. She had been so angry that she didn't realize how much her actions were hurting the very thing she was trying to protect: her marriage. One morning, Mia sat alone in the living room, holding a cup of tea. She looked out the window as the sun began to rise. The light made everything outside look soft. Mia thought about the conversation she had with Gloria. It had been hard, but it helped her see something new. Gloria seemed willing to change, and that made Mia realize how important it was to take responsibility for her mistakes, even though it was hard. Footsteps came closer, pulling Mia out of her thoughts. Gloria appeared in the doorway, hesitant but determined. She looked at Mia and asked quietly, "I was wondering if you were awake." She waited for Mia to answer. Mia didn't speak right away, but she nodded and put her tea down. Gloria stepped closer and said, "I've been thinking about everything between us. I know I've been tough on you, and I didn't mean to make you feel like you don't matter." Mia's chest tightened. Hearing those words made her feel better in a way she hadn't expected. "I've been thinking a lot too," Mia said softly. "I've made mistakes. I've been angry, but that doesn't excuse what I did. Spitting in the food was cowardly. I should have talked to you instead of doing something so childish." Gloria's eyes softened, and she stepped closer. "Mia, you don't need to apologize for your feelings. I didn't realize how much I was affecting you. I thought I was helping, but I was just smothering you. I didn't give you the space you needed." Mia felt tears fill her eyes. She had never heard Gloria speak like this before. It felt like a wall between them was coming down. For the first time, Mia felt like Gloria truly understood her. Gloria continued, "I know I haven't been easy. I thought I was doing what was best for you and for David, but I didn't stop to think about what you needed. I'm sorry, Mia." Mia's throat tightened. She didn't realize how badly she had been waiting for Gloria to say those words. Both of them were standing there, admitting their mistakes and starting to heal. "I've been so angry for so long," Mia whispered. "I felt like I didn't have a voice in this house, like I was always just the wife. Every time you made a comment or undermined me, it built up, and I didn't know how to deal with it." Gloria nodded. "I understand now. I've always been focused on David, on what I thought he needed, and I didn't realize I was pushing you away. I see that now, and I promise I'll do better." They stood there in silence for a moment, letting their words sink in. Mia took a deep breath and met Gloria's eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for hearing me." Just then, David, Mia's husband, walked into the kitchen. He saw that Mia and Gloria weren't fighting anymore. They were working together, side by side, like a team. His heart felt proud of them, not just for the meal they were cooking, but for how far they had both come. "I'll set the table," David said softly, with a hopeful smile. Mia and Gloria exchanged a look. They didn't need to say anything to each other. They both knew how much they had changed. They both smiled at him. The table was set simply, but it felt like a sign of how far they had come together. It wasn't just about the food. It was about healing, growth, and the chance to move forward as a family. When they all sat down to eat, David looked at Mia and Gloria. He saw two women who had once been at odds, but now they seemed to understand each other. He couldn't believe how peaceful the moment felt. "This is really nice," David said, his voice warm. "It's been a long time since I've seen both of you so relaxed together." Mia smiled and looked at Gloria with a thankful look in her eyes. "Yeah," she said quietly. "It feels good." As they ate, they talked easily. They laughed at jokes, told stories about old family gatherings, and even remembered things that once felt unimportant. For the first time, they weren't stuck in old arguments. They were connecting with each other in a way they never had before. After the meal, Mia stood up to clear the dishes. But before she could walk away, Gloria spoke to her. "Mia," she said softly, "I'm really proud of you. And I'm proud of us. We've come a long way." Mia felt warmth in her chest, and her eyes filled with tears. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, understood, and appreciated. "I'm proud of us too," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And I'm really grateful." David watched them. He had always known how strong both of these women were, but now he saw them in a new way. He saw how much they had learned to heal, grow, and become a family again. As Mia and Gloria shared a quiet moment, David realized something important. He understood now that the strength of a family isn't about being perfect. It's about being able to love, forgive, and move forward together. And with that thought, the future felt brighter, full of hope and new beginnings. The three of them sat together, not weighed down by the past anymore, but ready for what was to come. Thank you for watching. If you like this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. You won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.